And the most important ruling yet in the legal challenges to President Trump's executive order on immigration. Tonight in Seattle, federal judge James Robart wrote in his order, "The court concludes that the circumstances brought before it today are such that it must intervene to fulfill its constitutional role in our tripart government." The court's intervention was, in effect, to strike down the entirety of the president's executive order. We are joined now by phone by Laurence Tribe, Harvard Law School professor. Professor Tribe, what is your reaction to this opinion tonight?
I think it was historic, and I think it was correct. Clearly, the administration has a different view, but I think when the dust settles, even a 9-member Supreme Court that included Neil Gorsuch, if that's the way it turned out, would agree that this order on its face is lawless. It violates due process. It's religious discrimination, thinly disguised in violation of the Establishment Clause. It has numerous infirmities as a matter of Fifth Amendment due process. And what's really striking about the order is a couple of things that I think haven't yet been mentioned. One is that the court recognized that the states have standing on behalf of their citizens, and in particular on behalf of their universities, state universities in particular, because of the way in which the sweeping blacklist of people from 7 designated countries prevents individuals from returning to the United States with visas that had otherwise been issued. That's important partly because it recognizes the standing of state attorneys general in a context where that's in part a question of first impression, although the Texas court that stayed the DACA order by Barack Obama took a similar approach. It's also extraordinarily important to note that the government's cancellation of 60 to 100,000 visas in the dark of night, as it were, secretly, while litigation was being mounted in behalf of people who were being detained or sent back to their countries of origin, was something that was done basically behind the backs of the courts. And now the question is, in what way can this order effectively resurrect visas that essentially were killed by the Trump administration? On the one hand, it's possible to understand this order as automatically bringing back to life those visas. On the other hand, if you're one of the people who wants to come back to the United States and you have a visa that the government told you it had canceled, you may be in something of a quandary, and something must be done to clarify the situation in order to give the decision of this court its full human impact.
Professor, I really want to go back over this one point because it's so unprecedented in my experience from where I sit, and that is we have a group of cases ongoing in federal court being brought in different jurisdictions, first Brooklyn, then Boston, then Virginia, Seattle, Los Angeles. They are about visas. That's part of the evidentiary base of the case. And
right.
Secretly, unbeknownst to any of the judges in any of those cases, the government, which is a party to the case, reaches into the evidence of the case and changes the evidence, in effect, by revoking these visas. I can't think of anything like that, that a party like the federal government in cases like this would even conceive of doing under the watch of a judge.
Well, it would be very much as though President Nixon had decided to burn the tapes while his lawyer was arguing that he had a right not to reveal them. You know, we have had examples of gangsters destroying evidence while the government is trying to pursue them, but usually they don't occupy the Oval Office. It's really quite remarkable. I guess we'll soon be asking, what did the president know, and when did he know it? Was it Bannon? Who was it that directed all of this to happen? We didn't yet have a full Secretary of State representing the administration, although I'd have to go back to the chronology to see when Tillerson was actually confirmed and when some of this happened. It's all happening so fast that I have to confess I'm losing track a little bit of who was on first and who was on second. But it'll all get straightened out, and it'll get straightened out in a way that I cannot imagine makes this administration look anything other than lawless.
Professor, it looks like in the chronology as we have it now that those visas were revoked before Rex Tillerson took the oath of office. They were revoked around Monday, possibly. But you're right. We're going to get the autopsy on that and see very clearly who reached into the State Department and ordered that to happen. When President Trump was inaugurated, there was a lot of talk among, say, states like California, the Attorney General of California saying, the states are going to be the resistance, the Attorney General of the state of New York saying that the attorney generals would be the resistance against this president. For a lot of us non-lawyers, it wasn't easy to understand what that meant. I think to you constitutional scholars, it seemed clear. But now, tonight, we are seeing what that kind of legal resistance can mean.
Laurence, if I can interrupt for a second, this is only the first of many such events. I mean, take the sanctuary city situation, where it looks like the president is trying to yank money from states and cities that don't submit to the attempt on its part to discover all of the undocumented immigrants and potentially deport them. When states and cities say, you can't make us affirmatively cooperate, you can't commandeer us under threat of taking all our money away, they are invoking classic states' rights jurisprudence of a sort that used to be the favorite of the conservatives. I think we're going to learn that states' rights can be part of a democracy, sort of part of an experiment in liberty and equality as well.
Professor Laurence Tribe, thank you very much for joining us tonight on this historic night in the middle of these amazing cases. Really appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you for calling, Laurence.
Thanks. Tonight's ruling is a huge victory for the ACLU, which has been in these courts fighting these cases around the country. We're joined now by phone by Anthony Romero, the executive director of the ACLU. Mr. Romero, did you expect that Seattle was going to be the place where the most sweeping blanket ruling would finally be issued, and one that, as far as we can tell tonight, is being accepted and now, most importantly, enforced by the administration?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. The leadership from the Attorney General in Washington State, joined by his colleagues in Minnesota, really is significant for the litigation, not just out of that state, but for across the country. We have 4 lawsuits in various jurisdictions looking at the Muslim ban. And no one ever knows. We may have filed the first one, but we never know which is the first one to really register on the merits, or nor will we know which one is ultimately the one to go before the Supreme Court. Well, what is clear is that we're going to need this volume of litigation in many jurisdictions to keep the pressure on the Trump administration. And so the fact that attorneys general are jumping in, the fact that there are other public interest law groups like the National Immigration Law Center and the ACLU bringing these cases, I think really serves us, because ultimately, clearly the law is on our side. And the more that we can rob the Trump administration of momentum and ball them up in court and pepper them with these lawsuits as often as we can, the less likely they'll have the energy to implement the orders.
And one thing we've seen in the sequence of these judicial rulings is the first one in Brooklyn was relatively narrow. The next one in Boston seemed a little bit broader. The Los Angeles ruling seemed to be the broadest ruling of all, yep. but then it ran into enforcement difficulties. And then finally, Seattle becomes the blanket ruling that is very clearly directed by the judge to cover all 50 states. And you have to wonder, how much did the judge in Seattle, being the last one to rule in this sequence, benefit from being able to see all these previous incremental rulings leading up to his?
And I think then the judges in other jurisdictions will leapfrog off of the decision in Seattle. As other judges rule, they'll get comfort from the ruling in Seattle. And I think we'll likely see the jurisprudence evolve. The public opinion is certainly on our side. Already, there are Republican members of the Senate who are saying that the ban is not just un-American, but it's also unconstitutional. And so we need to put as much wood on this fire as we possibly can to make sure that this ban is not implemented and it continues to be struck down.
And have you ever seen, I want to go back to this point we talked about with Professor Tribe, have you ever seen a situation where the government in a case like this, the U.S. attorneys would be a party to a situation where a branch of the government would in effect destroy the evidence in the case by revoking these visas, the pending visas of the people whose rights were being argued for in these courts?
Sure, we saw it in the Bush years when all of a sudden these videotapes of harsh interrogation techniques and torture were ordered to be destroyed by Commandeer Rodriguez. This is nothing new. When the government finds itself against the wall and there's evidence that might jeopardize their cases, all of a sudden we find that evidence might be destroyed. It is not thoroughly surprising here.
Anthony Romero, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.